What is responsibility? What is this thing that makes someone responsible or not? And there are two main answers to this question. Some will say that it's a relation between your actions and what you deserve. So if you've done something bad, you deserve blame, and if you've done something good, you deserve praise. And that this is a relation that is completely that this is the case regardless of the consequences. Whereas the alternative view is to say that responsibility is a practice that it's something we do in order to reach some good consequences. When we hold each other responsible, we make people act in better ways. If you have a broad definition of desert and a narrow definition of consequence, as is often the case in daily speech or in legal literature, etc., it's easy to think that it's not just about consequences. When we hold also some people responsible because they deserve blame or praise. But in the literature on the philosophy of responsibility, the concept of desert is often used in this narrow sense called basic desert, which is something irreducible and undefinable that makes people deserve praise or blame then completely regardless of consequences. So I'm going to defend the consequence view in a broad sense of consequence against this narrow desert view. But if you have a broader understanding, it's possible to say that it can be both. But in any case, I'm going to describe in detail then what I mean by responsibility, so we can have an understanding of responsibility which is compatible with what else I say about the mind as a causal process and free will, and especially free will coming in degrees. So here's a concrete theory of responsibility based on philosopher Manuel Vargas, who argues that holding others responsible is a general strategy in society that cultivates morally good behavior. So to explain that, a good way of explaining it is how to see how Vargas responds to four common objections. The first is to say that, well, your definition makes it sound as if responsibility is just influence, but there are many ways to influence people that wouldn't be responsibility. So it seems that responsibility must be something more than influence. And he agrees. Well, the point is that it's a specific type of influence. Namely, the kind where you give people reason to act differently, where they can include in their reasoning how people have reacted to their actions, how it affects other people, etc. It's that kind of influence that is responsibility, or holding others responsible then. Another objection is that often people, they don't become more responsible, even if they're held responsible. You can threaten them with punishment, etc., and still that doesn't help. And that's true. In many individual cases it won't work, but as a general strategy it's clear that it works. That getting a fine for sneaking on the bus or raising your children, etc., that of course in general we can say that it works, that people are being held responsible, that it also makes them more responsible. Third objection, it seems that there's a difference between holding responsible just in any case, just holding someone responsible, and holding them appropriately responsible. Because it seems you could say, well, I want to achieve this good effect, so I put an innocent person in jail and say that if you do this and that, you go to jail for 10 years. And that will have the good consequence that people won't do that. But that doesn't seem appropriate to put that person in jail in this case. Vargas answers that it doesn't work as a general strategy to punish innocent people. So in order for this general strategy to work, you need to focus on who caused the effect that we don't want, or that we want to encourage. If someone were forced to do something bad, you should instead blame those who forced them, because that will then cultivate more morally good behavior. So as long as you do it in the right way, these two alternatives will be the same. And of course we can add that there will be different ethical reasons so why we shouldn't put innocent people in jail. The fourth objection is that often we can blame people or say something nice or something bad about them without them hearing it, or maybe we're talking about someone who are already dead, etc. So again, it seems clear that individuals, they don't always have this motivation that they want to cultivate morally good behavior. But that's all right, because Vargas's point is just that it's a practice that has this general effect, even if many people who do it don't think about it. And so even blaming someone who's dead or doesn't hear can influence others who hear it, or the person who is just thinking about it, etc. So it can have this effect in any case. Does not holding someone responsible require first that they are responsible? They must be responsible first, and then you can hold them responsible. This is what the basic dessert view would say. Yes, first you need to be responsible, and then we can hold you responsible. But the consequence view says instead that, well, it's actually the case that you become responsible by being held responsible, because then you learn that, well, there are different alternatives, different ways of actions, and people they will have these different consequences that people will react to in this and that way. And so you become this agent who is aware of choices, and that you need to reflect on how people are affected, etc. So it's the practice of holding you responsible that make you responsible. But of course also the consequence view will say that, well, this still presupposes a normal ability to think and feel. So if your brain is damaged, or if you're completely emotionally destroyed, etc., it won't work, because you need this normal ability to think and feel in order to have the ability then to be influenced by being held responsible through reflection or through deliberation. So it's when those mental capacities work, then you have what's needed in order to be held responsible. Yes. How does this practice then happen more precisely? Then I don't mean in detail of how people punish or how you can roll your eyes, etc. But I mean, what is it that makes a certain action into an instance of holding someone responsible? Here I'm adding something to Vargas and arguing that when we hold someone responsible, we compare their actions with a moral standard for such a situation. So that's what we need. We don't need responsibility to be something undefinable or mysterious. This is what's happening. We look at a concrete situation where you were doing something, and we think, in this situation you should have done so and so. And so if you are an adult, we think that you've had enough time to think and reflect and make experiences, so that you should understand what you should do in this situation. So we won't blame a young child, or we can tell them this is what you should do later, but we won't hold them responsible as we would with an adult. But when people are adult and they have normal capacity for thinking and feeling, then we expect them to understand how they should act. And so we hold them responsible accordingly. And what's interesting with this then is that it also explains how we can hold people responsible for things they don't do. Because some philosophers of responsibility will say you are only morally responsible for that which you are causally responsible, that you had to cause something in order to be responsible. But let's say that there's this small child being hurt in a situation where you should help, or about to drown and you should help, even if you didn't cause them to be hurt or fall into the water, or if they die, you didn't cause them to die. But still, you could be responsible for helping in that situation. And so we understand why you have this moral responsibility by understanding that this is what's happening in that situation. Then, an important and a bit difficult point: what's the difference between being responsible and being held responsible? Here I'm going to give a definition of being responsible, where I use the type token distinction. And the type token distinction is that something can be the same type if it has the same structural properties, but it's not the same token if it happens at different times or different places. So if I say chair, 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 it's the same type word, chair, because it's the same letters, but it's three tokens. So it's one type, chair, but 3 tokens chair because I said them at 3 different times. Or if you see 3 chairs standing on the floor, it's one type of chair if they all have the same chair structure, but there are 3 tokens because they're at different places. So that's a type token distinction. And then what I'm saying here is that you're responsible if it's type possible, but it doesn't have to be token possible, to act morally differently in a situation in a way that can be influenced through being held responsible. So what I'm saying is that it could be a case where we have Jack, and because of what has happened and what's happening in the brain of Jack, there is only one thing that it's token possible for Jack to do. Only one physically possible thing to do in that situation. And still, Jack is responsible because it would be type possible. In general, it would be possible to do something else. And if we had held Jack responsible, then something else could have been what was token possible in that moment. So let's say only one thing was possible for Jack to do, but if the situation had been different, maybe his father was looking at him with a certain look or had done that the day before, then something else would have been what was the only physically token possible thing to do in that situation. And so the reason why I'm spending time on this is that there are a lot of people now saying that, well, everything that happens in the brain is a causal process, it just happens, and we aren't responsible for it. They think that you have to have this soul or this unique sovereign type of agency, etc., in order to be responsible. And so since they don't believe that we have a soul or that we aren't these unique agents, then they conclude instead that we aren't responsible at all. And that's why I'm using this type token distinction to explain how it can both be true that there was only one possible thing to do in that situation, but also true that it makes sense to hold people responsible, because if we do that, something else will be what is the only possible thing to do in that situation, and it will also influence them in later choices when they are in the same kind of situation. So what has happened is that you have different philosophers now, famous philosophers like Dirk Perboom, Greg Caruso, etc., that say that we should understand responsibility as basic desert, something undefinable, irreducible, and then they reject. They say, well, but we don't have good reason to believe that such responsibility exists, and so they say instead people should be held responsible for their actions. And what I'm doing instead is to say that we shouldn't define a responsibility in that way. We should define it in another way, which makes more sense, and where it makes good sense to hold people responsible, even if what happens in the brain is a causal process. So what exists when we're talking about responsibility is people comparing actions to standards and then communicating to each other what they think should have been done through blame and praise, which can happen in so many ways, body language and all sorts of things, which make people then consider that in their deliberations. So the capacity to be responsible, so this general capacity to be responsible, is then just this capacity to take such kind of influence into account when we make our choices. And this capacity can come in different degrees, because we can have different degrees of free will and then different degrees of this capacity. So we can be responsible in different degrees as well, but I'll get back to that. A final comment on this general capacity for responsibility and responsibility for a concrete action, you just called X. So if I said on the previous slide what makes you generally responsible or have a general capacity for responsibility, but if you're responsible for a concrete action, it is something that you have done that could have been influenced through being held responsible in a normal deliberation process. And so you did something maybe good, and so we will praise you, or you did something bad and we will blame you. But anyway, you have this, you are generally responsible for it then. If it was something where it was possible to influence you in a normal deliberation process, but if you were psychotic or hypnotized, etc., then you are not responsible for that action. So this was a general account of how to understand responsibility in a way which is compatible with what else I say about free will and the mind as a causal process. Then we'll continue with talking about free will in the following videos.